Okay, we're gonna get started here in just a second. We'll give everybody a chance to hop on. All right, well, Rich, should we go ahead and get started and introduce ourselves? Welcome to our Sante Consulting webinar titled Pathology Candidates. What is your job search strategy? We're so excited to have you here today. We've really been looking forward to this. I'm going to go ahead and just let you know before we introduce ourselves individually that as soon as this webinar is finished, I'm Missy. I'm going to go ahead and send an email out to everyone who is registered, and it's going to include a PDF of all the slides. So you're going to have all the slides as something to keep in your back pocket for later. In addition, we're recording this session, so you'll have a recording of this session. I'll send you a link that you can access on YouTube. It'll be easy to access. So without any further ado, I just want to say that my name is Missy Morgan, and I am the Director of Marketing here at Sante Consulting. I've worked in marketing for more than 20 years, and I've been in the food, agriculture, architecture, and now the healthcare industries. And I really love working with Sante because if you know Rich, or if you don't, he's a very inspiring person. He really fell in love working in the pathology industry, and I'm going to let him tell a story and why he started Sante, but he's really infectious in terms of why he loves what he does and how he really cares about making that right match between the right job candidate with the right job. So here you go, Rich. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Missy. That was very kind of you, by the way. Yeah, I'm Rich Cornell, and I'm the founder and president of Sante Consulting. And so for those of you that don't know me, my background has been in lab medicine for the last 3 decades. Started out as a recruiter and have grown throughout my career. The claim to fame that I always like to tell people is there was a company in the 90s called Dianon Systems, and I did their entire AP buildup, and that really changed the landscape of specialty pathology across the nation. And I did their entire AP recruitment buildup. I worked for many firms, and I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Sante real quick. Sante Consulting is a firm that I founded in 2008 as a specialty firm. I worked for other recruitment firms over the years, and I felt that that you can't be all things to all people, and that a specialty-driven firm is really the kind of way to penetrate the market and really understand the market. So when we formed Sante Consulting as a specialty firm, we focused in pathologists, PhDs, clinical scientists, and executives at the director level and above. That said, we have evolved over the last 15 years as the premier recruitment firm for pathologists across the nation. And so with the presentation today, Missy and I are going to give you some tips with all of our knowledge and what we've experienced in the past and today, and how you can benefit from that experience, strength, and hope that we've had over those decades in landing your next ideal job.
Yeah, that sounds great. Rich, thank you. So before we get started, I also wanted to let you know that we provide a number of resources for people just like you in their job search. Over the years, since Sante has been around for more than 3 decades, and Rich has been in the industry for that long, we just know the things that are going to be useful for people who are in the job search and people who are looking to hire. So on our website, LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as YouTube, we're always trying to provide some great resources to help you through your search and through your career in this industry. And so if you're interested in staying connected with us and getting those resources, here you go. I also, I think Rich did a really good job of talking about who we are as Sante Consulting, that we're really kind of a niche. We have a niche focus within the industry. But what I also think is great, just to give you a little heads up, is a lot of people have questions about recruiters, how recruiters work, and where their money comes from. And so I think just off the bat, for us to tell you, here's the different types of recruiters that there are out there in this industry, out of this industry. And then I'm going to tell you, and here's the type that we are. So there's 4 different types of recruiters in general. You can be a corporate recruiter or an in-house recruiter, both of which work within a company. Corporate recruiters tend to be paid on a monthly like salary plus benefits, maybe a bonus structure. They work within the HR department, whereas in-house recruiters are a division, and they tend to be focusing more on onboarding people. But when you get outside of a company and you have independent firms, you typically have either a contingency recruiter or a retained recruiter. Now, for us at Sante Consulting, we fall within those 2 buckets. We are an independent firm, we're independently owned. But some of our clients say, hey, we want to do a contingency agreement with you where they pay us a little bit, or contingency means the firm, we get paid before, like right when the candidate gets hired. But a retained recruiter means we get a little bit up front, and then when the hire happens, we get finished out on the payment. And we just want to be upfront with you to make sure you understand there's a myth that working with a recruiter means that part of your compensation is going to be cut out to make room for the compensation where the recruiter would get paid. But it's actually not true, especially for Sante Consulting. Whether it's contingency or retainer, we're paid a fixed fee. It's predetermined, right? Between us and the client, who would be the hiring entity, we agree X amount is going to be paid to Sante, and we make that agreement ahead of time. So compensation is typically not really factored into the negotiated fee. In any way, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make sure that a candidate gets very fair, very good compensation, and that it's so that everybody wins. If it was that the candidate had to pay for it, it wouldn't really work out for Sante Consulting long term. So I just wanted to make sure I get that out of the way and let you know that before we get started. And Rich, you've been doing this a lot longer than me. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, and as our recruiters, the work the desk, as we call it, many candidates ask, what are our fees? And to your point, Missy, all of our fees are paid by the hiring entity. And so that, if you're working with a recruiter and they're charging you a fee, then that's against industry standards and norm. So that should be a red flag for you as a candidate.
That's a really good point. That's a very good point. So I also want to say this, if you do work with a recruiter ever in your life, we do think it's good for people to just understand what a good recruiter looks like. And if you see anything that's kind of unusual or doesn't fall into these parameters, then you should probably say, okay, I'm going to move on. A good recruiter it should offer you a non-biased third-party opinion, right? Like somebody who's they're not the hiring entity. We're not another candidate. We're just somebody who's the third party, and they should have good experience in the industry where you're trying to get hired. The whole point of a recruiter is to help everybody in the search and selection process. So when you think about getting hired by a pathology lab, by a practice, remember that they're pathologists, they're in healthcare, there's certain things that they do well. So they hire recruiters to do a job where it's not something they like to do day in and day out. It's not their profession. So they go outside and they say, hey, this is something that you do day in and day out. And you want to make sure that you're looking for somebody who does that well. A good recruiter should always be really interested in you as an individual. What are you looking for? What kind of job are you looking for? What are you looking for in terms of geography? Like, where do you want to live? What kind of finances are you looking for? What's going to be best for you personally and professionally, for your family, for loved ones? And they should be just a really good guide for you and the employer and help everyone through the process so it's very seamless and smooth. That's what recruiters are looking for. We want to make everything seamless and smooth and very helpful. So if you're working with a recruiter and things aren't going that direction, then, just be aware, okay, maybe I need to make a change. And this should also just kind of help you understand why a recruiter could be helpful for you.
And one of the things that I want to add to that, Missy, is
Yeah.
a good recruiter is going to be a career coach for you throughout your entire career path. And that's what really makes the difference between our recruiters and just general recruiters, is we're career counselors.
It's a helpful point too. And another thing to keep in mind is that not all jobs where there's a recruiter involved are nationally advertised. Sometimes people, a certain practice wants to run a very confidential search. There could be somebody who's already in the position, and they don't want to tell them yet. Or more commonly, somebody's going to retire and they're not ready to announce it to people yet. And so pretty often there's a confidential search happening, which means it's not going to be on a job board nationally, right? So it's kind of a helpful thing to keep in mind. Recruiters often do confidential searches as well as ones that are posted. So now that you know about recruiters, I want to go ahead and just tell you the 5 things we're going to talk about today. Today is all about your job search. And we want to make sure that your job search is done as easily as possible, smoothly, and with a ton of confidence. There's 5 things we're going to walk you through. It's what's your timing? When should you get started? Which is now. You should start now. We want to help you to find ways to identify the best opportunities. Rich is going to do a really good job of walking through the current market, because it's important to understand what kind of market you're in when you're looking for a job, so you kind of understand why people are behaving the way they're behaving. Then we're going to talk about interviews. There are some really great tips that we're going to give you so that you can interview with confidence and interview for the win. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about ways to make sure that the offer goes smoothly, and so that you're just ready for it. There's some really easy things that you can do to make a difference. So step 1 is getting started. I think a lot of the people who are on the call today, I'm sure that you're potentially a graduate or an upcoming graduate. And I would say, and I know I would say this because Rich says this, 1 year in advance gives you an advantage in terms of the job search. And we're going to walk you through what that looks like, but there's a reason for that. You might hear that and say, my gosh, like that's kind of far in advance, but here's why. There are a lot of things that have to happen between the time that you start your initial search and everything goes through and you're starting your job. Scheduling interviews, signing an agreement, right? That's actually a lot that has to happen between those 2 things. But after you've signed your agreement, you have to apply for licensing. If you're moving, you have to get relocated and look for housing, the credentialing process, hospital privileges, and then insurance. Those are all things that actually take weeks and weeks. And so when you add it all up, to make it as stress-free as possible for people like you who are really busy, 1 year in advance gives you an advantage and helps you to just be calm through the process.
And
Obviously,
another
yeah.
point that I want to make here, Missy, is that, and we tell candidates this all the time, is, the best jobs are the first to go. And so if a hiring entity has their act together, they're forecasting 12 and 18 months out. And if they're doing that, they're advertising for a job for 24. And those jobs, if they're great jobs, great location, great compensation, great structure, those are the jobs that people are going to get first.
It's an excellent point. Yes. So now that you kind of know the timing that's optimal, let's talk about something that's really important, which is prepping your CV. In our opinion, it's better before you even start looking at jobs to just quickly pull together your CV. And our recommendation is, if you're going to look in both academic and private practice, have 1 copy for academic, 1 copy for private practice, and then you submit the right one according to what you're applying for. And that way you're not scrambling at the last minute if you have this pulled together. This slide I'm not going to walk through. This slide is for you. When you receive that PDF in the email, you can just look back at this and say, I've got this in my back pocket. I can use this as a checklist to make sure I have everything I need on my CV. But there are some general tips about CVs that, as we look at a lot of CVs and we have over the years. So it's important for you to think about these things, because we see kind of some things happen over time where it's like, a lot of people are doing this. Number 1, if you have any missing years on your resume, it's really not that big of a deal if you just go ahead and say, here's why I have missing years. Explain it clearly, concisely, and then move on. I would say also people would rather look at a font that's easy to read, that's on 2 pages instead of an 8 or 10 point font on 1 page, right? There's all this like, do I do 1 page or do I do a smaller font? Like, what do I do? Use a 12 point font, let people look at your resume and find it very easy and nice to review. When you're at your interview in person, you always want to have a paper copy of your CV, right? So you want to use nice paper. Don't use any kind of paper where it's like so thin, it's easy to get wrinkled, etc. Hand them a nice sheet of paper, make sure it's on high quality paper, and make sure it's black and white. If you have bullets, which everyone's going to have bullets for their experience, etc., just bold and underline the headings and use bullets underneath so people can quickly read through your experience without having to figure out, is this connected to this or not?
And then one other point that I want to make on this, Missy, is the chronological order of the CV. You want reverse chronological order. And so the one thing that you don't want your future employer to look at is you don't want to send them a CV that they have to figure things out, right? And so if they have to figure out something on your CV, it's the CV's something in the formatting or something you haven't explained is missing. And so make sure that, it's in reverse chronological order and it makes sense.
So the most recent is first and then
Most
on and
recent
on.
to medical school.
Excellent. No, that's a very good point. There's also a few things to avoid, and you might look at this and giggle, but it happens. And then this also, I think, happens when people are in a hurry. You kind of make last minute snap decisions that just aren't wise. Please don't put your birth date and especially not your social security on your CV. Photos shouldn't be included. This isn't a place for a photograph. Drafting at the last minute makes people do crazy things. So take your time. It takes a little bit of time to pull together all the information that needs to go in your CV. It's not going to be something that's locked in your brain. So just give yourself a little bit of time to pull everything together, and definitely use spell check, but don't let spell check be the last proofreading you do on your CV. I highly recommend giving it to a colleague who's good at proofreading, because spell check will not catch ground rounds versus grand rounds, things like that, right? A computer can't do that for you. You got to have somebody who's got a brain attached. So those are our recommendations for things to avoid. Once you get your CV ready, then it is time to consider a cover letter. And we do think, it's great to have a cover letter sort of prepared ahead of time, but then you're going to customize it depending on the job that you're applying for. So that way your CV is your CV, you've got your 2 versions, and it's the cover letter that really gets updated depending on the job you're applying to. You want to make sure that you're including personal information. The cover letter is really where you say, this is who I am, this is why I'm awesome, and this is why I want to work at this particular location. This is what's really appealing to me. Oh, and by the way, here's my 5-year career goal statement. So they understand more about you and where you want to be in 5 years. Definitely know your audience too. So you got to kind of have a decent understanding of who you're sending it to, because then you can personalize it in a way that makes them care more about who you are.
And one thing that I want to add to all of that, Missy, and is that for the audience to remember to keep their eye on the ball. And you always have to be asking yourself, number one is, what's the goal of the CV and the cover letter?
Yeah.
It's not to make the introduction, it's to trigger a response from the person receiving it. So it's getting them to respond to you through an email, for an invitation, for a Zoom call or an introductory call. So that is ultimately your goal of your CV and your cover letter, is to trigger a response. And then if you're sitting in a room today with your co-fellows or residents, you need to look around the room and say, this is my competition. If it's a good job, I'm probably competing with somebody in my program or regional programs that are also looking at those jobs. So ask yourself, when you put this together, what sets you apart?
Excellent point. I'm glad you made that point. Thank you. So that brings us to step 2. Okay, so you've gotten your CV ready, you've got your cover letter. Now it's time to really start looking at those great job opportunities. So where are we going to go to look at opportunities? When we were putting these slides together for you, Rich and I were thinking a lot of people might just think I'm just going to go to Path Outlines, which by the way is it's a great tool. And Path Outlines has a lot of jobs, a high quantity, it's public. That's a great tool. But we really don't want people to lose sight of the value of networking. Networking with people outside of your class, outside of, having recruiters that are on your side and working with you, working with people that who are already working, they've been working for several years. Use your network and ask people, what kind of positions are open? Here's what I'm looking for. And I would say that because people always like to hire people where they have a connection because it makes them feel stronger going into the hire. And it would probably make you feel stronger too. But a last thing that we want to mention is job boards that aren't public, like Path Outlines. Don't forget about the CAP job boards, etc. But there are jobs that are not advertised on public forums. And we had mentioned this earlier when we were talking about confidential searches. Knowing recruiters, looking at recruiters who you're familiar with, looking on their boards, but also just placing a couple of phone calls to say, I'm looking for this kind of job. Do you know of anything? So that jobs that aren't advertised, you're being considered for those too, is always a good idea. The more you can have kind of a stretched approach to your search, not just one place, I think is going to give you a benefit. And I also think when you're looking for jobs, it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? You're going to see in a minute how many jobs are just posted on Path Outlines, not to mention all the other jobs. So it can get overwhelming. And what you want to do is think like in filters, right? When you're shopping for things online, you can use filters to make it less overwhelming and see things that only apply to you. It's like that with jobs too. Think about the geography where you really want to be. Narrow your search. What's the compensation you're looking for? What kind of practice setting are you interested in? And what kind of culture do you want? Do you want a place where it's like, we're here to work and we don't really have much of a personal life and you're a go-getter and you're really passionate about putting a lot of hours into work? Great. Like, where are you going to find that kind of culture? Or are you looking for a practice where you can have a little bit more balance to your life and integrate your personal life with your work life better? Those are things to consider. And Rich, if I'm missing anything, feel free to hop in.
You're doing great. Yep.
Okay. So the way to do that is to really think about your personal life, and no one knows that better than you. What's your quality of life that you're seeking out, and then consider your spouse, your significant other. Is there someone in your life that's important to you where your job is going to have an impact on them as well? What do they have to say about it? If you have kids, you got to look at the school systems, which impacts, the region where you're going to want to be working. And just the culture in general for a workplace is really important because you can have a match in so many other ways. But if you're not a good match for the culture or vice versa, it's going to be an awkward first job. So this is where I would like to launch a quick poll. And the question that we want to ask you, because we want you to be thinking about this for yourself, not just as we go through this set of slides. What is your number one consideration during your job search? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this poll, and we'd love for you to respond because I want you to go through the exercise of thinking, well, what is my number one consideration? What are the things I should be thinking about? So I'm going to launch this poll. And if you guys could go ahead and tell us, is it geography? Is it compensation, work-life balance, partnership track? And it could be something else that I didn't include. So just feel free to put in whatever is important to you. There's no wrong answer. This is literally you getting yourself ready for your search. So I'm seeing numbers are still changing. I'm going to give you guys probably 5 more seconds to get your answer in, which is really fun. So far, I'm seeing that geography is the most important.
So I can't see the answer. So I'm going to guess.
Okay, I'm going to share the results.
Oh, I was wrong. I was going to say compensation.
Ooh, it's geography. Well, you know what, Rich? I was going to guess geography because you told me that. You said it actually usually trumps compensation.
It does. Yeah, right.
Okay, so this is probably just helpful for you to see. You're going to have conversations with people where people say, man, I'm all about the compensation. I'm all about the work-life balance. This is about you and it's not about other people. So I would say just really know what's right for yourself and right for you and your loved ones, before you let other people's priorities kind of take over. So that was fun. Now I need to move this so I can. Okay. Thank you for that. Now is the time for us to walk through the market. And I'm going to turn this over to Rich because he's got rich things to say about the market.
Yeah, so thanks, Missy. You can go ahead into the next slide. So now segment 3 is the market trends. We need to understand kind of where the market is and where it's been, right? And so there's been a contraction in the market that over the last over this year, actually. And so what we've experienced, and this is from G2, that the earnings, the Q1, Q2 of 23 for large lab systems and private equity owned groups has contracted, and that's because they had all they labs that had converted to COVID testing during COVID had enormous revenue that the investors got comfortable with it, and now we have decreased revenue because the COVID testing has gone away. And so there's been a contraction in the market. Now, that hasn't really affected the job market per se, other than maybe the commercial sectors and the private equity owned groups. So the market is what we consider a candidate driven market. So there are more jobs today than there are candidates. And so you can see that through this illustration through a number of articles that have been published in various publications and societies. Well, the next slide is, I think, the pathology outline slide, which really tells really a good snapshot of the story. So, we currently have the highest recorded number of pathology related positions in my experience, in the last 2, maybe even 3 decades. Just on Path Outlines, there are 725 posted positions. And as Missy previously mentioned, that doesn't include all the unadvertised positions or the positions that are also advertised on specialty society sites, journals, CAP website, or the ones that just clearly aren't aren't advertised. My projection in experience tells me that there's probably about 1,000 positions out there for pathology related positions, pathologist jobs. So if you're a candidate looking to enter the job market, you're in a great position. So where are the jobs? So if you look at these, this is right also from Path Outlines, you'll see that there's been an outmigration in the Northeast and South, and that's where most of the jobs have come, mainly from the Northeast. If you look at certain industry segments and subspecialty segments, there are a tremendous amount of jobs in the New York, New Jersey, what we call that tri-state area. And so we've seen a lot of outmigration to the southeastern United States. Groups have experienced a lot of retirements in those areas, in those regions, and then volumes increased. And so now the workload for those groups in these locations, they need to add FTE pathologists. And this was a comparison. That previous slide was a comparison over historically, but I think it's a good idea to understand kind of where the market was. And this is a great illustration of that from Path Outlines. There was a prediction back in 2017, 2018, a number of articles. One of the JAMA had put out an article, CAP had published an article, a couple other pathologists had published articles on the looming shortage of pathologists over the next decade. What they didn't factor in, and we could see that as the uptick in about January of 2020, where pathology jobs started increasing right before the pandemic. And then with the shutdown of the pandemic, you can see the dip down. And then once things opened back up, the market just exploded. That's because of the, what we've experienced with many groups is that if there was an senior pathologist in a practice that was thinking about retirement or near retirement, the pandemic really changed their priorities and they retired. And so when we came out of post-pandemic, all of these jobs were available, volumes, increased dramatically. And so we saw this all of a sudden, the sudden surge. When you start thinking about your job search, the first thing that I want you to think about is, number one, is what's your strategy for your job search? It's really good to understand all of the industry numbers, where the jobs are, what the starting salaries are, so that you're in line with expectations, and you don't have unrealistic expectations of what compensation is and what you should expect, no matter what your subspecialty is. What is a realistic signing bonus in today's market? What are realistic benefits? Partnerships important to you, and understanding an annual bonus as well. All of these things should factor into your decision making. So let's talk a little bit about compensation. This is a tricky area. So this is the latest survey. I believe this was published by Doximity that put this, that recently put this out. And so these are the top 10 specialties with the greatest increase, with the highest increase over the last 12 months as far as compensation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Missy, but
you got it right.
Is now in the top 10, and they overall the percentage increase was 2.7%. So the average compensation for 22 was 357, 384, and this is across the board. So this is whether you're a resident or fellow or whether you're practicing. The average was 357. So let's talk about that moving forward. We're going to talk a little bit more about that expectation going into some of these additional slides. Benefits. Here are some things that you need to think about when it comes to benefits. Your relocation, CME allowance, defined bonus. Your relocation. One thing that I always tell candidates is just remember that your relocation, the tax codes have changed, so it is a taxable event to you. And so you need to consider that as well. So the days of them just giving you the money or paying for it and not having a tax consequence is substantial. Now, if you're a resident and fellow coming out of practice or coming out of fellowship, going into practice, next year, when you go into private practice, you're going to go into a new stratosphere as far as income bracket pretty quickly. So you're going to have some tax consequences. So what I recommend is that you get together with a good accountant or CPA that can help you navigate that. Relocation allowance we're seeing across the board. I'm just going to give you some numbers. 10 to 15,000 is the average relo that we're seeing, at least our clients giving. You want to consider what your CME allowance is, what other defined benefits and bonuses and incentives are, what's the retirement plan, both short-term and long-term, time off, call schedule. They clump that together in PTO, paid health holidays, insurance, signing bonuses, all those things. Keep in mind that if you're negotiating a contract with a group or a large healthcare entity, many of these benefits are non-negotiable because they're protected, right? So your time off affects everybody. If you ask for another week, most likely they have to unilaterally do that. Same thing with your retirement plan, typically non-negotiable. So just know these things going into your negotiations and with the potential employer. Next slide.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. Now it's poll time. And by the way, I did want to say, I noticed that we have a question in the Q&A, and we're going to leave a good bit of time at the end, and we will definitely get to that question. So if you have questions, feel free to stick them in there now so you don't have to remember them, and we will definitely get your questions answered.
And this is a
Now,
great poll question.
yes. So this is important because if you're going into your search right now, you need to understand how important student loan repayment is to you. So especially if you're going to school in the United States, or if you're doing your fellowship residency here, like you're going to have a big bill at the end of the day, right? So you're going to want to be thinking, how important is this to me? Is this a priority to me? Is it not? So I'm going to ask this question in a poll. And hold on.
And as you're doing that, Missy, you know, it's interesting as
Yeah.
we're talking to candidates, more and more candidates that we've experienced in the last 12 months are asking about this. How, you know, does the group offer student loan repayment? Historically, in hospital systems always had a vehicle in place, and you can go ahead with the survey, Missy, as I'm
Okay,
talking.
you guys can go ahead and answer. Yep.
And it had a vehicle in place for primary care and offers student loan repayment as an incentive to them to recruit primary care specialists. But now with great shortages in all specialties, that's being moved into other areas as well besides primary care. The other thing is that we've been asked many times if it's a non-for-profit, because there's government programs now that if a physician goes into a non-for-profit organization, they get a portion of their student loans repaid. So it'll be interesting to see what the audience thinks of this.
Yes. Okay. So we have 20 out of 25. I'll give you guys just a few more seconds to answer if you're interested in answering, whether it's very important all the way down to not very important, or if it's not applicable to you. So we got 22 out of 25. I don't see any more coming in. So I'm going to go. Oh, I got one more. So I'll give you
Let's see it,
just a few
Missy.
more seconds. All right. I'm going to end the poll. Here we go. So we have the vast majority are saying it's not applicable at 48%, but we do have
Good for them.
35%
That's
who are
good for
saying,
them. Wow, that's
I
good
know,
for them.
like
All right, I
right
wish I was in that bucket.
I know, me and my husband, yeah. So, but a lot of you are saying 8 out of 23 respondents are saying it is important. And so that's
Yeah.
something for you to think about and be prepared for. Maybe you want that to be part of your compensation package. And that is something that, some entities will help out with.
And ask that question, and will they assist in loan repayment? And then ask, if you're working with one of our recruiters, ask them, let them know, that's
Absolutely.
because we've got some clients today that are, will consider offsetting some of their student loan repayment. And in fact, I had an email from a client this morning that they've increased their signing bonus significantly, could be 6 figures. And part of that could be utilized for a signing bonus. I mean,
Nice. Repayment.
Yes.
And a thing I would say too here before we move on is your future employers are not mind readers, right? They're going into this just trying to understand who you are and what's important to you. So the more that you understand that ahead of time and you can convey that in a kind, natural way, it's very helpful for them to understand in the process. It's a very competitive market. So there we go. Let us move on to our next section. Step 4, interview for the win. Is it okay for me to admit that this might be my favorite part? Even I've grown to love interviewing because I used to hate it. And I would say this. So in all my time at Sante and in talking with Rich, he will always say, please do not forget every single person from the beginning to the end that you interact with at any employer. They are part of the interview process. So the person who responds to your resume, maybe they're in HR, who knows who they are. Whether it's an administrative assistant, whether it's a pathologist, whoever it is, that person's interviewing you, and that interaction very much matters. And I've heard Rich even say, I'll let you say it.
And we've had deals not come together. I mean, the interview team loved the candidate, but the candidate during the interview process was rude or inappropriate to the administrative person that was escorting them, from interview to interview or setting up the interview, that logistics, the candidate was a little short. Well, that admin probably has the pretty good ear of the chair or the hiring entity, and they killed the deal. They said, this person will be very difficult to work with. So
Yeah,
remember that.
let's don't let that be you.
From the gatekeeper to the chairman, always be kind.
Everyone has dignity. Yes. Okay, so say from your first interview to your last interview, let's just say you have 3 different interviews that you have set up. It is going to be really helpful for you to identify and kind of make a list in priority, like which job are you really hoping for? And that happens all the time. Like, this is the one I really want. In order of priority, this is the one that's in the middle, and this is the one that I'm less interested in. So we want to make sure that you are using your interview schedule to your advantage. So you want to make sure that your first interview is actually your warm-up, right? That's the one that's maybe the lowest priority for you, because you want to fire on all cylinders when it's time to rock it. So here's what you do. This schedule on this slide is assuming that you have 3 interviews. You're going to prioritize them, and you're going to schedule the number 3 one, the one that you said, this is my least favorite. You want to schedule that first. So the second one is the one in the middle, and the last one you schedule is going to be the one that you really you want that job. And this is going to set you up so that you are so prepared, you've had plenty of practice, and you can go in and give the best impression for the job you want the most. This has turned out to be a very successful thing for candidates that we work with. So please keep this in mind. And of course, it'll be in the slides for later.
Yeah, and might I add, this strategy, and I tell candidates this all the time, well, I ask them, when's the last time you've interviewed? Other than your residency or fellowship, what have you actually interviewed for a job? It may have been years ago. And now, next to what specialty you went in, what residency you chose, what fellowship you're going into, this is probably the most important decision you're going to make in your career, where your first job you land. So you have to practice, drill, rehearse. And the way you do that is by this strategy right here. So that when you're, interviewing at that top job, man, you're well rehearsed, you worked out all your bugs.
The more natural you can be means you've worked out all the bugs. So there we go. Now, whether you do an in-person interview or virtual, and these days, especially because of COVID, there's usually a combination. I want you to keep these things in mind. This is important. You got to dress to impress. And the second point goes with the first. I want you to go into these interviews thinking very conservatively. And I don't mean conservatively politically. I mean conservatively in terms of the way that you dress and portray yourself. The object of the game at an interview is not to wear something wild, outlandish, attention-getting, because it takes the attention off of who you are and your experience, and it puts it on the thing that you're wearing or doing that's a little, like strong. You want the attention, but in your conversations, to be on who you are and what you're going to bring to the table. So, if you notice this guy in this picture, he's wearing kind of a beige shirt. He's got an undershirt. And his background is nice and simple virtually. You don't want a messy background. You just want to think nice, clean, simple. So the attention is on you and not a crazy necklace or something, right? And then most importantly, when you're doing an interview, whether it's in person or virtually, you got to be looking and making eye contact. You don't want to stare him down. It's not a stare contest, but you do want to have some natural eye contact throughout the interview. Now, when you're doing it virtually, you got to identify where your camera is located and look right in the camera. Again, it's not a staring contest. You don't want it to be weird. You just want it to be natural so they feel like you're looking at them. And then, of course, if you're in person, it's a lot easier to identify where to look.
And as pathologists, many of you are introverts, and that's why you chose pathology. So this is kind of outside of your comfort zone. So you have to make a conscious effort for eye contact, firm handshake when you meet people, those type of things. That makes a difference.
And when you're well prepared, you can do that so much easier than if you're not prepared and feeling nervous. We all experience that. Now, I did want to point this out too, especially at this time and place when virtual is extremely common versus in person for meetings, but for interviews, both is better. And here's why. When you're in person, there's a lot of benefits. So even if you have the option to just do virtual, I would say, I think you should go and you should be there in person and do some in-person interviews because there are benefits, even if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. The presence of body language can tell you a lot, right? When you're interviewing, it's not just them finding out about you, it's you finding out about them. You need to know if this is a place where you want to work. And in doing that, you need to see things in person for what they are. And you really can't replace that with virtual. There's just some things you're going to miss. There's also fewer interruptions. So you can be more present in the moment. And so can the people who are interviewing you. The process gets streamlined. You can see more people right in a row in a quicker time frame. And just in general, communication when you're in person is a lot easier than when you're virtual. You're going to have different interruptions at different times, and it can be harder to have the conversation that you need to have. So our recommendation is do both. And I did just want to point out, when you're in an interview, whether it is online or in person, your whole intent is to get answers to your questions and to make strong connections with people. Your job is to understand who they are and care about them as people and as professionals. And you're trying to connect with people.
Well, and the other goal you have to remember of the interview,
Mhm.
the number one goal is to get the
Number
offer.
one goal.
Get the
Yes.
offer.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, your goal is to get the offer. Whether you were on it or not, you're in a stronger position. So remember, it's better to get the offer, not want the job, than to really want that job and not get the offer. So interview to get the offer.
Good point. Good point. And then, what you're really trying to do as well, they're going to be interviewing a number of people, and you want to be one that really stands out to them. So you've got to ask questions about each person individually, about the practice. You want to understand who each person is, what their role is. Expect to be tested when you're there. And you want to make each part of the visit count for something, right? You don't want to be repetitive throughout the whole thing. And at the end of the day, I would say these two things are really paramount. If you want the job, you need to say, listen, I am extremely interested in this position. I want this job. Thank you for your time. And you got to follow up with either a handwritten note or an email. And I recommend doing both, sending off a quick email and just saying, I really enjoyed my time with you today. I'm so interested in this position. And then doing a handwritten note to follow up in addition is a great boom, boom.
Yeah, and with the testing, we have some practices and most groups will test you on your clinical knowledge, right? So they're going to sit down either at a double-headed scope and say, let's review some slides together. And they'll want to see how you approach the diagnosis through those slides, or they're going to sit you in a room. They're going to give you some slides, and they're especially, if you're a subspecialist pathologist, say derm path, it's very common with dermatopathology. Then they're going to give you a tray of slides and they'll say, okay, write down your answers or electronically, put your answers down. And it's not a pass or fail, but they're going to want to see how, kind of where your competency is at that point.
So expect that. And we've got
Go into it expecting it, because most employers will do that.
Now we have 12 minutes left and we want to have a really solid Q&A session. So I'm going to move through a few slides a little more quickly, like this one, for instance. These are typical interview questions that we want you to just be prepared for. If you have answers ready for these, you're going to be in good shape going into it with confidence. I'm not going to go through them, but these are going to be available to you after our webinar. And I did want to put this in here. There's a way to compare practices. And this is something that Rich has been talking about for years. It's called the Benjamin Franklin method. You want to make sure that at the end of your interview session, say you have 3, say you have 5, you want to make sure that you've asked a consistent list of questions across each practice so you can compare apples to apples. At the end of the day, you need to make like a pro-con list, and you need to be able to say, where do they fall in this category, and look all the way across the board. So at the end of the day, you've got, oh, this one's coming out in the lead, and it might surprise you, so it's called the Benjamin Franklin. It just means you're making a pro-con list and you need to have consistency when you ask questions.
Exactly. So you're using the same matrix for each practice. Very key.
Yes. Yes. Good job with the word matrix, because that helps with a word picture. Now, these are just some reminders, and I'll quickly go through them. You don't want to discuss politics or religion like you're really there on a professional level. You don't want to get discounted, or you don't want someone to get a weird feeling just because you might be a Democrat and they're a Republican, etc. Don't let those things get in the way. Just don't discuss religion or politics and you'll be good to go. You also want to try to picture yourself on the job. Oh, go ahead.
And one point, I mean, these are all great points, and where
Yeah.
I've seen the candidates really falter is they let their guard down during dinner. And so
With the
you gotta
drinking,
remember,
right?
with the drinking, yes, yeah. So they overindulge and you know, that not necessarily act inappropriately, but it creates a red flag with the client. Now there is social time, you know, where you can sometimes let your guard down, but just remember that you're there interviewing for a position. They're paying for your expenses. Don't overindulge and don't let your guard down.
And when you go on the interview is a time to be there by yourself. It's not a time for a significant other. At dinner, you might be able to bring a significant other, but during the actual interview on location, don't bring a significant other. That's not
And we've
appropriate.
seen them, you know, want to bring their spouse, significant other to the entire interview.
Yeah. So
That's inappropriate.
yeah. This one's important. Okay, so let's spend a minute on this. There comes a time in the interview when they might say, what are your financial expectations? And we don't want you to get painted into a corner. So instead of giving them a number, even if you have a number in mind, try this instead of giving them a number. Just say, hey, how are individuals at my level of expertise being compensated? Because my expectation is to be compensated accordingly. And that keeps you out of a corner. You don't want to say something that's too high and then they walk away and say, we're not going to be able to meet that. Or even be in the realm of getting to negotiate. And you don't want to say something too low and then you can't negotiate out of that either. You want to just put the ball in their court and then respond to an offer.
That's right. So never pigeonhole yourself with a number.
Nobody puts baby in a corner. I had to say it. Sorry. They might not even know what that is, but I do. Okay. Step 5, I'm going to go back a slide. This is all about getting ready for the offer. Okay, so you've gone through the interview, you're expecting an offer. How do you get prepared for that? And here are some best practices. But first and foremost, you need to understand that the waiting on the offer, the getting the offer, the back and forth, this is still part of the interview, right? You don't want to shut it down at this point. Your response, your timeliness is a message to the employer. It paints a bigger picture of who you are and how you're going to be as an employee, and you want that to be positive. So best practice number 1, you want to give them your time frame before the offer, right, Rich? Like
Yes.
you don't want them to, if you are interviewing in some other places and you need some time, then you just say, hey, I'm kind of trying to keep my options open. I have a few other interviews. I'm not going to be ready to talk about, you know, narrowing it down for another 3 weeks. And then they know he's ghosting me because he needs 3 more weeks, or she is not
that's where a lot of
responding.
people, you know, a lot of individuals, you know, they'll interview at that practice number. They're interviewing at 3, they interview at practice 1. Practice 1's excited about the candidate. They make an offer, but you know, the candidate's not ready to make the decision because the 3rd interview isn't for another 6 weeks. So, but that hasn't been communicated back to the practice. So if that were communicated to that practice, they would have probably held off on making that offer. So your goal is not to get as many offers as you can. Your goal is to get the best job that you can. It's not a competition on how many offers you get. So don't think you have to go into it, oh, I want to get this offer. The competition is to get the best job and be the right candidate for it. And so keep that in mind.
Yes, and that leads me to the next one, which is if it's not right for you, say no. If you get an offer, turn it down. Let them off the hook and let yourself off the hook, but communicate clearly. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's just not right for me. I wish you so well in the future because you might run into them later too.
Don't burn your
Okay, and then
bridges.
do not burn bridges. It's bad. This is important, but it's important for you to think about this later. There are some things that are employer red flags that we just want you to be aware of, right? So keep this checklist in your back pocket as you move forward and reflect on it. When you get an offer after your interviews, be aware of what the red flags are. So if you notice some red flags, you can say, I don't think I feel good about this, and you can move on with your life and avoid a disaster. There's also another best practice that a lot of people overlook, or they do it, but they don't do it right. Legal contracts should be reviewed by lawyers, okay? It should be also, if you get an employment contract, you should have a lawyer who specializes in that review it. And it shouldn't be a family member, and it should not be a
Yeah,
friend.
and there are specific attorneys that specialize in physician employment contract law, and there are even more special attorneys that specialize in lab medicine and pathology.
For example, Elizabeth has done a really good job in our opinion, and we have a good relationship with her. She's also done a webinar with us to help people like you to understand their contract and how to work through it. If you don't know anyone and you want a recommendation, we've heard really good things about her and had good experiences with her in our contact with her. So here is someone just to get the ball rolling. This is absolutely not this is just, hey, if you're looking for someone, there's someone out there. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch another poll, because when you get to the offer stage, it's important for you to go into it thinking, how important is partnership track to me? And you want to be aware of that going into an interview or the offer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch this last poll, and you guys go ahead and answer. I'll give you some time. But this is a scale. It's either very important to not very important, or it's for some reason it's not applicable to you.
And we're seeing less, a lot of groups have sold or are being sold. So there's not as many partnership opportunities as there once was. So you have to keep that in mind, and you got to prioritize if it's important to you, really how important, and really what does that mean? So, and what does that look like? But those opportunities are shrinking annually.
And I'm
Water,
going to go
private,
ahead and
yep, go
I'll
ahead.
end this poll in like 3 seconds. I see 17 out of 23 people have participated. So you got 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. Ooh, I had 18 come in. Here's the results. It looks like it's important to most people on the call, or at least somewhat important. So that's helpful for you to think about and to be aware of thinking about as you go on.
So
Now I have
33% is important, yeah, and 11%. So 44% think it's pretty important.
Yeah. Now, the last thing, and this is important, but really quick, the offer is not a buffet, okay? You have one opportunity to respond to an offer. So take your time, look through it, have a lawyer on cue to look through a contract, by the way, have everyone ready on cue to look through things with you. Maybe it's a mentor, and look through it and take your time, ask for a couple of days to look through it, etc., however long you need, and come back one time. It's not a buffet. It's really kind of like a sit down dinner where you can ask for one more piece of bread. and whatever the things are that you want to ask for them, but just ask for it one time. So they view you as someone who's really professional. You have your act together, you're organized, and you're communicating very clearly with them. And with that being said, it is now, we have a couple of minutes. And for anyone who wants to stay a little bit past 1 o'clock, we have questions on the board. And so the first question is from someone who's anonymous, and I'm fine with anonymous questions. So if you have anonymous questions, don't be shy. How long have we been in business, and what are some of the companies that are similar to you? Rich, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, so Sante has been in business 15 years, since 2008. And as I think I previously mentioned, I've been in the industry for the 3 decades. There's a couple of other firms, and we have great relationships with them. The firm that stands out, that is probably most like us, which we have a partnership with, is a company called Vanguard, and they're based out of the New England area.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and then we have Julia Wang, who's saying, what's the average number of offers that recent fellowship grads are receiving? And how do we know how many jobs to apply for? Those are great questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's across the board. I would, apply. I would not interview at more than 5 positions. I kind of look at it as house hunting. If you've ever been to house hunting or apartment hunting in a day, right? By the end of the day, you don't remember the features and benefits of the first couple places that you looked at. You're just kind of overwhelmed. Interviewing is the same way. If you interview at too many, you're not going to remember what the features and benefits and why you like those other practices. And so you're really just kind of spinning your wheel, wasting your time really as a candidate. So I would narrow it down to 5 practices that you're really interested in. Now, in order to maybe interview at those 5 practices, you're going to have to send your CV out to, probably, depending on the strength of your training and background, probably 10 or 15 places.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we have a question from Alicia Dillard. She's saying, how is the job market for molecular pathology?
We're seeing the market is still very strong for molecular pathology, and there's a lot of industry related positions for molecular pathology. But most practices that we're working with, if they want molecular pathology, they want another subspecialty. So in most cases, there's 2 the molecular pathologists have done 2 fellowships and brought them together and working in 2 areas.
Excellent. I have another question from an anonymous attendee. How do you ask about work-life balance and a pathology opportunity to future employers? I think that's such a good question.
How would you answer that, Missy? That's a great question for you.
Yes. Okay. I think that is a really great question, by the way, anonymous person. Here's the deal. It's important for you to understand what it means to you. And it's important that you ask it in a way that they can answer as your employer. So there's things, and we were just talking about this yesterday on a webinar to a group of, to practice groups, to laboratory employers. We're talking about what are some of the things that you can do to improve the culture of your lab so that people who are looking for work-life balance will find a good place, a good match for them. You can say, tell me about, and I would list them off, and I can actually include a slide. Here's what I'll do. I'll include a slide that has some of the work-life balance features and benefits that an employer could have, but it includes things like flexible scheduling, how much paid time off do they offer so you have vacation time, what do you guys do, what's your policy on mental health and sick days, do you have any free gym memberships for people so that we can, take a good break in the middle of the day and kind of get some exercise and take care of our bodies. If you have children or dependents and you need childcare options, there are some employers out there who can provide you with childcare or even do a little bit of research for you if you're relocating. So those are just some of them, but I will include a slide because you asked that question. So thank you for that. And then the next question we have is, how early should job searches start? And Julia, we actually addressed this at the very beginning, but if anyone hopped on even a few minutes late, you might have missed it. You should try to start your search optimally 1 year in advance. And that's because of all the things that have to happen even after you accept the offer. There are so many things like credentialing, insurance, yada, yada. So optimal is 1 year, but you can obviously do that in a shorter time frame. It just means that all the things that have to get done are kind of squished into less time.
Yeah, and licensing and credentialing, if you're moving to a different state, can take a long time, months. And so I would first recommend FCVS, so that's Federal Verification Service. Make sure that your credentials are verified through there. Most states are recognizing that now, which does speed up the licensing process a bit, but it really depends on credentialing and then paneled on the insurance companies. So if you're looking, that's a big thing for practices. Once that employee starts, how are we going to get paid for the cases they're signing out?
Yeah, great question, Julia. Thank you. Now I have another anonymous attendee who's saying at the moment, what are the compensation you have for most jobs now? How do I get started? So overwhelming, right? Okay, so it's like, what's kind of the average compensation, Rich? And I would say this is a
Yeah,
great
it
question for you.
depends. There's a lot of variables to that. So the variables are, what's your subspecialty and what type of practice are you going to go into? If you're looking at academics, the benchmarks for academics are typically, somewhere in the 230 to 250 range. If you're going into the private sector, those benchmarks can be anywhere from, 240 to 300. And it all depends on, again, your subspecialty and what the demand is for that in the marketplace. I can tell you the top 3 subspecialties out there today, but that changes. And those top 3, because we looked at this yesterday, Missy, are cytopathology, heme path, and breast. Those are the top 3. Those are the highest demand subspecialties out there. How do you get started? I think we just went through all of that. You can certainly reach out to myself or one of my recruiters within Sante Consulting, and we can talk to you one-on-one on how to get rolling with Sante. Again, there's no cost or obligation to you.
Absolutely. There's no charge to you. I have Rich's email on the screen now. So this is a way that you can get in touch with Rich. You can always contact us through the website or on social media. It's usually me or Rich answering those, or any part of our team as well. So that was a great question. Don't feel overwhelmed. We've got a whole list of everything you need to do to get started, and you'll get it in your inbox today. Now I have another question from
This will
Jacob.
be the last question, Missy, but yeah, go ahead. This is a great question.
Okay, Jacob Volk is saying, what should we expect in terms of travel to interviews, in terms of flight, lodging arrangement? Do most academic or private jobs pay?
They do, yeah. So the expectation is that all of your travel expenses should be paid for by the hiring entity, whether they're academic or private. Now, they'll, in most cases, want you to, book your own flights. They'll make the hotel and ground transportation, but you'll have to book your own flights on the front end, and then expect to be reimbursed for that after the interview. But you should keep all your receipts during the interview, and then at the end of the interview, submit those for reimbursement to the practice or academic center.
That's helpful. I just take a picture of my receipts as I go, so I have them all on my phone.
Your
Hard
Uber,
copy.
everything. Yeah. Whatever expenses from the time you leave your home until the time you return, you should incur they should incur those costs.
Yeah, you can use your Google Wallet, make it super easy. Okay, that's all the questions that we have time for. But if the last 2, the anonymous questions, if you want to ask those questions to Rich, here's his email. You can submit a contact to us on the website, social media. Off we go. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined. We sincerely wish you the best in your search. We believe in this industry. We have passion for it. And you entering the workforce is going to make it stronger. So we wish that you get the very best job and the one that's going to make you the most happy and excited to go to work. Take care and have a great day.
And thank you, everybody, for attending. And feel free to reach out to us on one of the social channels or emails directly. Have a great day and good luck.
Yeah. Bye-bye.